Welcome, friends, to the 10th Summer Pride Festival of Vermont Pride Theater at Chandler. I'm Sharon Reeves, a member of Chandler's board and also of its Pride Planning Committee, which organizes this summer festival every year and also an annual winter benefit favoring an LGBTQ organization from the region. The purpose of these events is to present through the arts the issues and concerns of LGBTQ Vermonters with context of interaction between audiences and artists in order to build understanding and acceptance among these Vermonters and their families and friends and the wider community. Pride events could not take place, though, without the support of our wonderful sponsors. The Gay and Lesbian Fund of Vermont, the Samara Fund of the Vermont Community Foundation, the Vermont Conference, United Church of Christ, and its open and affirming congregations throughout the state, and Calypso Continuing Education. Media support is also important. It comes from Vermont Public Radio, The Point, and WCVR. Despite COVID-19, this year's festival is especially full and interesting. In addition to the photo exhibit and auction we'll be focusing on tonight, there will be 6 performances of 3 wonderful LGBTQ-themed plays. The Homosexuals by Philip Dawkins, directed by Richard Waterhouse, covering 10 years in the life of a young gay man from a small town who must come to the city to find his community. It will be presented on Friday, July 17th and Saturday, July 25th. Cloudburst by Tom Fitzgerald, directed by Margot Whitcomb, in which 2 80-year-old lesbians go on the lam to Canada to find a place where they can marry before it was legal to do so in the US. It will be presented on Saturday, July 18th and Friday, July 31st. And Immediate Family by Paul Oakley Stovall. African-American siblings and half-siblings gather for a wedding with homophobia, race, and religion in the context. It will be presented on Friday, July 24th and Saturday, August 1st. After each performance, there will be a live talkback with the director and the cast. Tickets are $10 each and can be purchased at www.chandler-arts.org. We hope to see you at the performances because your support is also essential for the sustainability of Vermont Pride Theater. Thank you so much for coming tonight to this terrific photo exhibit plus auction, and I hope and trust to see you at the performances. Bye.
Hi, thank you for joining us for the virtual opening of Jon Gilbert Fox's photographic exhibition, At the Right Place at the Right Time. I'm Karen Dillon, Executive Director of Chandler Center for the Arts in Randolph, Vermont. Tonight, I have the honor of introducing Mr. Fox, though many of you already know him and his impressive photographic works. He'll be interviewed tonight by longtime writer David Corriveau, who in his 25 plus years at the Valley News earned a well-deserved reputation as a thoughtful observer of the arts in all their forms. Thanks to both Jon and David for being with us this evening for what will surely be a memorable interview about the backstories of a few dozen of the 50 plus photos Jon has included in the show. After the interview, I encourage you to go to chandler-arts.org to see the photos they will discuss, as well as many, many more of Jon's images. On the website, you'll also have a chance to participate in our silent auction featuring dozens of items which Jon and a few other generous individuals have donated to benefit Vermont Pride Theater. If you find an item that really speaks to you, you have 3 weeks to place your bids. The auction closes at 5 p.m. on Sunday, August 2nd. On Saturday, August 11th at 7 p.m., we will host an in-person opening of Jon's work at the Chandler Main Gallery. We're excited to be able to come together, but please wear your masks and plan to socially distance for this opening. In addition to the show and the donation of all the memorabilia, Jon is also kindly offering a signed digital print of any photograph in the show for a minimum donation of $150 to Vermont Pride Theater. For more information on all of this, visit our website, chandler-arts.org. And now I introduce to you David and Jon Gilbert Fox.
Hello.
Hi there. We did
How are
it.
you, David?
We landed. The eagle has landed. Well, that was a lovely introduction from Karen. I guess I'll open things with a question for you. It occurred to me today that on Facebook, where we've been corresponding for quite a few years, you had mentioned going through a lot of photos in flat files, I think you called them. And was that in response to the invitation from the Chandler?
No, it just happened that the invitation from the Chandler came just at the right time. In fact, I should thank them very much first for making this happen. I'm very grateful to everybody there and to Fred Pond, who first asked me to be part of this. And we are very thankful for Seth Stoddard, who's making all this happen tonight and has been working hard to put it all together. So thank you, Seth. But what David's talking about is I had a gigantic flat file where I kept a lot of memorabilia and as well as photographs and all sorts of paperwork, and it was taking up about half of a room. And I was starting to say, well, I need to make some room. So I started taking things out of the flat file and putting it in boxes and reorganizing them, if you can say I have any organizational skill. And so as I took different things out or discovered stuff, I started putting them on the web on my Facebook page. And then Fred asked me to be the guest artist during Pride Month. And I thought, what would be appropriate for that? And I looked at photographs that I'd taken all through the ages that had to do with theater, but also had to do with gay themes and gay people. And I thought, well, let me put that together and see how that works. And this show is a lot of things that haven't been seen for a long time, and many things that have never been seen before. Some have never been printed before. In fact, some that are only on the web of Tony Bennett, I scanned the negatives and then only made positive scans of them, and so there've never been any prints made of those. So it's an interesting mix of things, and it's going on today. It's more like, if anybody remembers, this is your life with Ralph Edwards. You're Ralph Edwards tonight, David, with this kind of going through my life, and I hope some of the stories will resonate. But I think a lot of what I wanted to do was introduce people to people who I thought were important, in some cases, in the history of kind of what has happened with gay LGBTQ people in the United States and other places, and just know some history. And I think some of the things will speak for themselves, but I think some of these stories need to be told, and I'm really grateful for tonight's opportunity to do that.
Well, one of the things we had discussed leading off with was the picture of Franklin Tammany. If that one is available to be called up here, that'd be. That was, I believe,
number 9. I think if we can tell Seth, that's number 9 of Frank Tammany.
Well, for a little background, we thought this one was particular. It was Mr. Tammany at the Gay Rights March, it looked like in the early 1970s. And by that time, he'd been advocating first for himself for being fired. There he is.
Yep.
What was the federal office that he was in that he got fired once he?
Well, he was an astronomer with the government, and he wasn't part of the government for very long. They found out that he was gay, and really it was he'd kind of been caught, and then he denied it. But since happened about 1954, And Frank Kameny became a real important part of the gay rights in the United States and really in the world. He fought to get back that job, but then he also fought for everybody else who was losing their jobs. And he dedicated his life to that. I thought that this was very important with the latest, in terms of looking at the latest thing from the Supreme Court, which finally says that you can't fire somebody just because they're gay. And this is what he was fighting for. Unfortunately, he didn't live to see that change, but he worked very hard for that, and he suffered for it. He really lived on nothing. He lived for this cause. And I had discovered him early on as growing up. And he
not in our history books, presumably in school.
No, no, he was in none of the history books. You had to pay attention in the newspapers because at that time, you know, I wouldn't call myself out. I certainly started understanding who I was, but it wasn't easy to be out in those days for anybody. But I decided I just thought that he was a heroic figure for me. And in fact, it's interesting when I went to the College of William and Mary, who I'm also very grateful to, well, they had a thing that's maybe a bit of a scam, but they had who's in American colleges and universities where they take students that were somewhat accomplished and they'd recognize them and you'd get all this sort of stuff. And one of the things that they asked each of us was, who are your heroes? And I took the easy one. I said Albert Schweitzer first, and saying that, you know, he was one who was taking care of a population that and giving his life to other people who were of a different race. And then I said also essentially that Franklin Kameny was giving himself over to an unpopular minority. So they were my heroes. So I finally got to meet him, and I was marching behind this banner before I stepped out to take a quick photograph. So that I didn't get a lot of photographs of this at the time, but this was about 1972 or 3, I think 73, and it was a part of a march also against the Vietnam War. So we were as you can say in the background, it was the Gay Activist Alliance group, which was a fairly recent. They had only gotten together and started in 1970, whereas he had been involved in gay organizations, again, like I said, since the 50s. And he had been he really put himself on the line because he also let his name be known. He would be photographed and give his name, where other people were trying to hide who they were because they could get fired. There were a lot of people that he was fighting for, some of whom took their lives when they couldn't get their jobs back. But he persevered.
This is sort of that was McCarthyism of another sort. Also didn't make it into the history books the way McCarthyism did in the House Un-American Activities Committee and all of that. This was the same sort of issue in a lot of ways, but just never got the press.
Well, it involved many of the same people, especially J. Edgar Hoover was very much keeping track of these things. But you said it is in the books, but this book, which just came out, which is called The Deviants' War, The Homosexual versus the United States of America by Eric Cervini, just came out, and that essentially tells you in quite a few pages the story of Franklin Kameny. And if you get the New Yorker, there was a really good article about that, I think just in last week's New Yorker. So people are finally recognizing him. And I'm sorry that he didn't get his job back and he wasn't recognized as well during his lifetime.
Well, when you spoke of professionals of all sorts who didn't dare come to the fore at first, and I think one of the people we also discussed was Victor Garber, the actor,
Yes.
who came to fame both on stage and in the movie version of Godspell.
Right. That was his first real breakthrough.
Role, and in his time in the theater and TV and movies for quite some time, he didn't dare come out.
No, he didn't come out till he was 63 years old, which is not that many years ago. But this was a photograph. I was in Washington, D.C. doing another shoot, and Victor was there in Merrily We Roll Along. And he said, why don't we do some headshots type stuff? So this was about, 1979, 80. And so this was done in Washington, D.C. when we all were a lot younger. But no, it's interesting, Victor's career, in that Victor was really known as the actor. I mean, the actor's actor in New York on Broadway. Everybody respected him, but he rarely got the kudos or won the awards that he should have. And part of the reason was he was very closeted about being gay and did not want anything to happen that would
Even hint at it.
Which would destroy his career. And one of the first things was, if you saw the movie with Glenn Close of The World According to Garp, he was originally offered the role of Roberta, the transvestite nurse. Pardon?
John Lithgow's role that he ended up getting nominated for.
Right, it was a breakout role for him, and that really started him on a trajectory that's gone places since then. But Victor said no. And one of the things that's interesting, because while we were photographing these things, we did some outside, we wandered around DC and did some things in the apartment. And his phone rang a few times, and he kept saying, no, 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 to whoever was on the other side, end of the line. And it ended up, it was Wendy Wasserstein, and she was trying to get him to take the part of Peter in Heidi Chronicles. And he said, no, 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 because Peter is gay. So he said, no, I will not do that, because that's going to be the death of me. Well, after it was on Broadway and they were handing out the Tonys, they handed the Tony to Boyd Gaines, who won for playing Peter. And the first thing he said, I want to thank Victor Garber for not taking this part. And it's the very first thing he said. And so, Victor's had an interesting career, but I think it could have been quite different if things were different in our United States and in the arts and on Broadway or anywhere else in the arts where many people think of, oh, sure, everybody's gay in theater, but it doesn't necessarily benefit you. And it still could be a stigma, and you don't want to start taking roles where you're stuck playing the gay character. But I like this picture.
Yeah, no, that's cool. You mentioned Glenn Close, the pictures of her, I believe number 46 on our list, from when she was on Broadway in Crucifer of Blood. That's right before, it's like 2 or 3 years, I think, before World According to Garp, and the trajectory of her career on screen.
That's true. Because she had started off singing. Most people, and she's admitting it now, but after she's gotten over the trauma. But very few people that know that she started off in Up With People, not only singing, but she wrote many of the songs. I have some of the music and the albums, and she's given credit for a lot of the songs. And so she was mainly doing musicals first. Except one of the first things she did was a member of the Wedding. But can we get Glennie up here? What number is she?
46. 46.
But she had,
go ahead.
Earlier on, one of the early musicals, in fact, one that really started her was the last musical that Richard Rodgers did, which was Rex. And she did that on Broadway. It didn't last very long, but it was kind of her making. In fact, one night we were a bunch of us who knew her. I had gone to school with Glennie, and then we palled around in different things. And a bunch of us who knew her during college and other people who acted with her, we were going to have dinner with her after one of her performances in Rex in New York. And we ended up that she couldn't go. And what happened was that she had just gotten signed on with the agent, John Springer, who also took care of Liz Taylor and just anybody you could think of amazing people in Hollywood, especially women. And so she had just been signed up, so she had to go to dinner with him instead. So so that kind of changed what happened then. But we've been in touch different times since. And this series of photographs, I'd gone to New York and I was shooting for something else. And again, we'd said, let's do some headshot stuff. And she said, oh, let's do it in this apartment that one of her co-stars was staying at on Fifth Avenue. So we spent a few hours doing this. And I really like how many of these came out. This is one of my favorites because I think she looks like Brigitte Bardot in this one. And I think it looks like a different Glenn Close than a lot of people are used to. There's another one in...
People, if their first memory of her is probably in, what's the one with Michael Douglas? Why can't I conjure that one?
Oh, with the rabbit.
Yeah.
And all that hair. Well, men especially remember in that because it was so frightening to us.
Scared him to death, yes.
Right. We did all sorts of stuff around there. And what's interesting, I should tell the story. After we were through, she said, right now my roommate is Mary Beth Hurt. And it's her birthday tonight, and I'm going to throw her a party. Do you mind coming to this? And so I said, sure. And so I arrived there later, and it was very strange. I walked in, and there were all these guys hanging around in the living room, and I could hear crying in the bedroom. And what it was is Mary Beth Hurt had been told on her birthday by John Hurt that he no longer wanted to be with her. So she was crying her eyes out in the bedroom, and Glennie was in there trying to console her. And this was the party. And everybody else was out there. And what's interesting is that who was there. In fact, this is the first time I met. This was Victor Garber was there. Paxton Whitehead, who was playing in Crucifer Blood, Paul Giovanni, who wrote Crucifer Blood and also had been the first director of Equus, and he was there with Peter Schaffer, who wrote Equus and Amadeus, which was going to open shortly. Let's say Joe Grafazzi, who is one of the best character actors that nobody knows his name. I'm trying to think who else was there. Israel Horowitz and Eric Roberts, who he had been playing in the soaps, but he had finally gotten a movie that he starred in, his first movie, which was The King of the Gypsies, and he was all excited because the movie company had sent him a limousine, so he was excited. He never had a limousine before. But what ended up is each of us would kind of go in the bedroom and try to help with the consolation and wish Mary Beth Hurt a happy birthday. But in the meantime, we were all sitting out there eating the hors d'oeuvres away. And at some point, we all ended up in the kitchen, and I don't know who started, but somebody started singing doo-wop and 1960s songs. And it was just an amazing evening, singing these old songs with all these people in the kitchen while we rummaged around looking for something to eat. And these are people from Broadway who had great voices. And so that was kind of an interesting evening.
And none of this is the kind of thing you pictured when you went to William and Mary. I mean, you went with the way you had described recently. You had an artistic bent anyway as a youngster, some painting and cartooning, and then
photography.
And then was it your dad or your mom that gave you that little brownie, that little Kodak
Well, my mother gave me the camera that she'd been given on her graduation from high school, which was even before, or it's different from a Brownie in that it has a little bellows that comes out and you look down through it. So, and that was when I was 8 years old when we were on a trip to Maine. And that began my photographing, but I did all these other things at the same time. But then photography became kind of my mainstay as far as looking at the world and representing myself. And after college, well, college was very good in that they asked me starting freshman year, starting my first day, to be the photographer for the Alumni Association. So I got lots of experience, and then
The dark room you were saying. That's
oh, absolutely, I had a dark room that was all my own for 4 years, at any time of day, 24 hours a day. So that was kind of nice.
you made the most of it. I mean, even before you graduated, I mean, you were taking every assignment you could find and probably sleeping about 4 hours a night, I bet.
Nah, it was all right. No, my trouble was I took early morning Saturday classes. That was awful. But no, that and that community was very good to me, because again, part of my interest in the arts and the stage things was that I was doing acting myself. And in fact, that's how I met some of these. I mean, that's again where Glennie and I were in acting classes and things like that together. But one of the interesting things, again, to go with the Pride theme, is that while I was there in Little Williamsburg, Virginia, one person who kind of who did most of the directing for the local little theater, got permission from Mark Crowley to do the very first production of Boys in the Band that was not a New York production. And what was interesting is that I was probably the only one that wasn't a sailor from the USS Enterprise in the but we put on quite a production of Boys in the Band that got rave reviews and sold out. And in fact, they wanted to extend it another week. And I said, no, I've got to go to class. And so we only ran it so long, but that was quite an interesting thing to be part of.
And the time at William and Mary that you subsequently, I guess, started doing some work, freelance work. You were mentioning like Wolf Trap, the National Folk Festival and so forth, and that where you got to know many musicians who you subsequently became subjects for you.
Yeah, because when I moved to Washington, D.C., I ended up teaching photography out in Maryland, but also I was freelancing at the same time. And I worked for the Wolf Trap Farm Park. I did all the photography for the National Folk Festival. I worked for the Washington Ballet, the Smithsonian Folk Festival and Smithsonian things, but I freelanced for all sorts of things. So there were lots of things that were feeding my interests and my eye that were just so much fun. And I was just taking, thousands and thousands of images for these organizations. And what's interesting, you're talking about going through the flat file and everything else, is that here I am at 70 and I have tens of thousands of negatives. I have slides. I have all of this stuff, really hundreds of thousands. And especially things like the Wolf Trap Farm Park, or especially the National Folk Festival, I have photographs of some of the most wonderful people in the history of folk music. And when they needed photographs, they only printed maybe 5, 6 during the year. So I have all these things that have never been seen and have never been printed, and I don't know what to do with them. So tonight and this month is an opportunity at least getting some of this stuff out there.
Well, I don't know whether it hit when you ran into Norman Kennedy. Was it there, or was that after you got up to northern New England?
Are we going to look at Norman Kennedy next?
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, Norman I knew from Williamsburg, from the time when I was in college. So I knew him from 1969. And Norman had originally come to the United States to represent Britain at the Newport Folk Festival. And then he'd worked with Ralph Rinsler, who was a great folk historian. In fact, he's the one who discovered Doc Watson, among others, and later became the head of the Smithsonian. And then Norman was recognized for his master weaving in the traditional sense, and he became the master weaver at Williamsburg, where William and Mary is. So I knew him from that time, and we kept in touch, and also did different. Oh, that's not Norman.
That's Hockney. Norman is number 12.
Where was I?
I'm talking about the work that Norman was doing.
Oh, I was going to say that we also did different projects together. We went down, in fact, to East Tennessee with Ralph Rinsler to do a major history of the weaver who was down there, who was still using the loom that his grandmother had used, that had been thrown out in 1804 as being no longer useful. And we did some things in Scotland, and he now, well, he also has been recognized by the National Endowment for the Arts as a national treasure. Excuse me, for humanities, as a national treasure, as a fellow, and for all that he does in maintaining the old ways and sharing them with other people. And he created, years ago, the Marshfield School of Weaving, which still is working very wonderfully, that does traditional weaving. In fact, right now, the woman who mainly is running the place is recreating early materials for the furniture like in Mount Vernon and in Williamsburg and in old plantations. She's using the same materials and things like that, and that's what much of what she learned from working with Norman, who works with the natural materials and does everything the old way. And in this photograph, I was kind of doing thing to Edward Curtis and his Indian photographs of Norman with one of the blankets that he'd spun and dyed and woven.
And this has to be early 70s, I imagine, as well.
That is. That's before he went up to Massachusetts and then settled in Vermont.
That's it. Now he's our neck of the woods for some time now. I mean,
he is, and the New World Festival he's been a part of for quite a while at the Chandler. That's also one of the reasons why I thought it was important to have him there.
And I'm just so used to pictures of him well into his golden years, and so a shot like this just really knocked me out to see that.
Well, with that red hair, he's always had golden years. That's all.
Well, we're on the subject of musicians. Maybe, God, where do we begin?
I know, what's on our list? Those of you out there, you should know that David and I are only talking about a certain number of these, and we each submitted kind of what we thought we wanted to talk about, and then we combine them to figure out what we'll talk to in front of you.
Might as well segue to Beverly Sills, the shot you've got her being made up for La Traviata.
All right.
That had to been late 70s, maybe?
Probably about 1976. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I was doing for Wolf Trap. And Wolf Trap brings in things from the outside, but they often will produce things themselves. And they put on this production of Traviata with her in the lead. And it was nice. Again, I've been so lucky. And I mean, I got to spend about a week with her. And as you can see, in front of the stage, behind the stage, and anywhere she was, I was pretty much allowed to be. And wonderful to see what I got to see and then share it. And there was one time I went in and she had gotten something from an admirer. She says, I have this box of Godiva chocolates, and I really don't like Godiva chocolates. Why don't you take them? I said, sure. I mean, this was before regifting was really, popular. But I said, sure. And I said, well, why don't you like them? She says, I really like Hershey's with almonds. So the next time I saw her, I had a big thing of Hershey with almonds for her. So it was a nice exchange, but she was quite gracious and easy to work around.
And how about Baryshnikov? You had, I think it was for the Washington Post, you took some pictures for a production he was doing not that long after his defection, if I recall.
Right, it was the year after, and in fact, it was another thing that was produced by Wolf Trap, but Washington Post wanted me to work with. By the way, I've made some notes because this old brain forgets some things. Um, but I was working with, if I can remember, oh God, I probably didn't write it down. But in any case, the writer I was working with at the Post won the Pulitzer Prize for dance reporting. And so again, this was at least a week where I was in the midst of everything every day. And he was there working with Mariana Tchaikovsky and Martina Van Hamel. And at the time, he was kind of going with Kelsey Kirkland, who was also in this. And I don't know if you all know that that was quite a stormy relationship, but there were times when some of us had to just go out of the theater while they had their spat. So I was, I saw a lot of things I didn't need to see, but he was very, again, somebody who had no ego and was very easy to work with and didn't mind me just being there all the time. And being there all the time, also there are some other photographs talking about Tony Bennett. Tony Bennett was having, I don't think we have anything to show of him, but in any case, he was there because he was showing on other nights when they weren't dancing, and he was there with Cal Basie. And I was wandering through, and I said, "Do you mind if I take some photographs while I'm here?" And they said no, so they just let me wander around while they were rehearsing, and I was very pleased to get photographs of them. Again,
Oh, yes, he is there.
oh, there we go. Go back to the title. I often ended up at the right place at the right time, and again, people have been generous, people have been good, and allowed me to capture them in some way.
Well, that's a skill that you don't learn in school either. I mean, you've either, it's one of those things you're wired for. You've either got it or you don't, and you cultivate it, but you had the knack, and that's not necessarily something you pick up in school.
I guess it might have been a knack, but also probably I guess I didn't have any fear. I mean, I was, if you look at this, I mean, you're looking at a lot of people at the beginning of their careers. You're seeing a lot of young people, and I was a young person. I mean, I was doing this when I was in my 20s. In fact, around DC, somebody told me I was known as the young photographer. So it was kind of the beginning of things, and a lot of these people, except for maybe Tony Bennett, were also early in their careers and were more open to being available and being photographed in whatever way I wanted to do it, which was nice.
If it was social media times, you probably would have had a little less good fortune.
Oh, I think that's very true. And also talking about doing it as I want to do it. I mean, a lot of these were done for clients, but a lot of the ones that you're seeing aren't necessarily the ones that were published. Sometimes, I hate to say it, I have problems with editors that some of them may be listening, but I give them usually what I like, but you always have to give them more. And sometimes they just do stuff that I thought, yeah.
I imagine some of the cropping probably appalled you as well.
Pardon me?
I imagine some of the cropping and just the positioning of photos, particularly in newspapers, probably.
Oh, sure.
The palm to head.
Because they have to fit within the column. They have to fit across something. I mean, there's a photograph. I don't know if we should maybe go to that one right now of Archer Mayer.
Oh, yes. At the Brattleboro jail.
Right. That was one that was an assignment for Vermont Life magazine, and I was going down to photograph him, and he said, let's meet at the jail and we'll wander places from there, because I wanted to get something a little gritty, kind of going with the Joe Gunther type stuff that he was doing, the mysteries. And this was one of my favorite ones in it, and they used it for the opening, but the way they did it across 2 pages just didn't give the same feeling that I wanted. So it's nice to have it scene in toto here, so you can see the composition and how I wanted to work in everything that was there. And again, this is basically the lighting that I was given. I think I bounced a little bit of light off a side wall to put some light in his face, but otherwise the red chair was sitting there, the light coming out of the jail, and then all this colors.
Lights on the ceiling, I'm just noticing for the first time. And
Oh yeah, because this
that's
is, I
almost
mean,
like a piece of sculpture or something, or a mural.
yeah, those prisoners got an art history lesson. But there they were down in the basement. But he was just wonderful because I don't remember if I drove around or he drove around, but we went to all these down and out places around Brattleboro that he knew, these blasted buildings that were falling apart. I don't know if you want to show the second one too, that I took in a place that was all abandoned, but he was very generous with his time, and we took hundreds of photographs in all sorts of places. And he's somebody I've kept up with. Yes, this is one where you see the kind of doll that's stuck up there on the rafters. That was exactly where it was when we wandered through this place. And then all these walls were just perfect. And one of the things is I gave, one time I found, many people know that I find things, that I collect books and I collect things. And one of the things through the years that I had found a long time ago was this beautifully made cast iron gun that had its own holster, and on it it said souvenir of Brattleboro, Vermont. You know, I tried to figure out exactly what it meant, but it was too late, since it was probably from about 1920. And I thought, well, in whose hands would this be best? So I gave it to him, and he was very grateful. And then he said, well, what can I do for you? What can I give you for that? I said, I don't want anything back for it. And then I said, well, how about making me a character in a book? So not that long later, maybe about a year later, he came out with, and I've got it for you just to see. He came out with Three Can Keep a Secret, in which Jon Fox, Jonfox, is a character, and he's gay. You might think that I did the murder, but I'm not gonna tell you. But in any case, suddenly I became a character. So I guess I became an honorary Vermonter somehow.
Well, you've learned the barter system pretty well since moving up here. Was it late 1970s? I think.
Yeah, well, that's true.
That was a bit of a roll of the dice to move out of a metropolitan area where you have easy access to culture at the levels that you were covering. It was a roll of the dice.
Well, it was a roll of the, I mean, I moved up here flat on my back because I had broken my back in a bicycle accident. And when we came up here, Daryl Hotchkiss and I moved up here together, and we weren't quite sure what we were going to do. He was going to be a lawyer after he was through in law school, so he was going to study for the bar. But there wasn't much I could do in the condition I was in. But then I thought, oh, well, what I have is portable. I'm sure there's lots of places up here that need theater and dance photography. So I started going around to all the places in Boston, figuring, here's a big city. And I went there, and they laughed and laughed. They said, most of the theater stuff that we show comes out of New York, and they already have their photography done. And anything that we produce here, the local photographies are banging down our doors to do it for free. So no, sir, we don't pay for your kind of stuff. And I had been working in and out of New York, but I found out that because of transportation in those days, it wasn't good enough for me to be able to go there and be available for them, which sometimes was in an hour or a half hour, and I would have needed a place to stay in a dark room in New York. So that kind of disappeared. So it took me about another decade to reinvent myself. And one of the nice things is that Vermont Life helped me do that, because I started wandering. I mean, as you can see from some of these photographs, I took my camera everywhere, and I just started wandering the back roads of Vermont, taking photographs, and I built up this portfolio. And Vermont Life every season had a contest for the best landscape or whatever it is for winter, spring, or fall, or summer. And I submitted for the winter, and it ended up winning the first prize. And so I said, oh, well, this will open a door. So I got some things together and took them up to the editors and said, can you use me? And they said, yes. And what's also interesting is that the photograph that I took, we moved into Stratford, Vermont, which I really give credit for being just the place I needed, both of us needed at that time. It's a magical place. In fact, at the time we moved there, the New York Times had a article, I don't know what it was about, but they called Stratford painfully picturesque, which it still is, but also it had a community that was quite welcoming. And that was important. And the photograph that won was one that I took about 5 o'clock in the morning, deep in the snowbank, when it was 30 below, shooting the sunrise coming through the South Stratford church window. And so that's how I got started really up here. So that changed my life.
And again, at that point, this is late 70s, early 80s, to
Right.
mid 80s, thereabouts.
Well, no, it was later than that, because it was about 10 years after we moved here. So it had to be mid 80s.
That overall stretch where you did the reinvention, I get the impression that was sort of the period.
Yeah.
And one of the shots that we have, or do we have it? No, I guess not. But it is online on the Chandler site for the Pride Festival. There is a link that does show about 30 of the pictures, and one of them is William Sloane Coffin at a piano. And I gather you got to know him during that time in Stratford.
We did. He lived up in the Upper Village, and that was a photograph that I did for my very first book, which was called Vermonters, which I did with Don Tinney, who did the text. And in fact, it's interesting that only 2 nights ago, we're watching the news on CAX or something, and there's Don Tinney, who's now the head of the Teachers Association in Vermont. And so it was kind of strange. It was a kind of experience that suddenly he was here. But this was taken mid 80s, because we had I think this book, The Vermonters, came out in 1984. And he remained a good friend. And as things were changing with people, gay people getting married, and what was it called at the time in Vermont? That was before marriage. Pardon?
Civil unions.
Civil unions. He kept saying, don't you and John want to get married? I really will marry you if you want to do this. And we said, no, the time isn't right, because, at that point it was civil unions, and then it became marriage, but then marriage was only available in certain states and only recognized in certain states. So if we had gone from one state to another, if one of us had gotten sick or injured, the other might not have been able to take care of them. And we said, no, not until it's the law of the land. And he pressed this. I mean, I don't know if you saw him when he was dying, but he really he was dying in this bed that they set up for him to see people. And on his dying bed, he was saying, please, don't you want me to do that? I could even do it here. I said, no, not yet. And, but he was a wonderful man. I mean, he again gave his life to other people, but also enjoyed it to the max. I mean, he had a good time.
This is somebody who took seriously what was going on in the world as far as human rights, and across the spectrum, whether it's war, gay rights, civil rights, women's rights, and as serious as all of those were, you could see in that face. There's also just the love of music, of life, and being in Vermont's not too bad either.
Oh no, but in 2020 Christianity, a lot of people wouldn't call him a Christian for his views. I mean, he was probably the most Christ-like person I knew, but he wouldn't fit in the evangelicals these days. But he was good person.
But he fit in Vermont, and I mean, that's where Vermont, and to a lesser extent, New Hampshire, particularly our neck of the woods, the Upper Valley. It's not perfect, but it's been more welcoming to LGBTQ people than a lot of places.
Yeah.
It was before these became, whether you call them buzzwords or movements. It wasn't perfect, but it was a lot more live and let live than you could have in, say, the Bible Belt.
Yeah. And that was one of the things about Stratford. I mean, it was almost an oasis in the midst of places where it might have been a little more iffy. I mean, it was a place that took care of us while we found ourselves.
This shot here in black and white reminds me to ask whether you started doing more color once you started with Vermont Life. Was that sort of when there's a little bit, we're diversifying a little more, or?
I'd say so, because one of the things is that, again, when I was working for clients for Wolf Trap or anything like that, I would be having to photograph things maybe in rehearsal or first time they were up, and go home at night and work in the dark room all day, and the next day, have 50 prints to get out to the whatever the presses were that needed them the next day, and all that was mainly black and white. There wasn't much color in magazines, or even more in newspapers. So most of my work was in black and white, and yes, since Vermont Life was all color, anyway, it wasn't all color at that point, to tell you the truth, because
it had some good black and white, I remember, particularly in the 70s.
Pardon me?
Particularly in the 70s, I remember that their black and white, they mixed in well with the color.
Yeah, in fact, that's part of the problem that I'm working with right now. Again, I have hundreds of prints that are black and white that I shot for Vermont Life that I'm trying to figure out where they need to go. But yes, it was color and black and white, but I think the color was more, yes, for places like Vermont Life and other things like that who could use them. But before that, it certainly wasn't necessary. I wasn't doing a lot in color. In fact, a lot of times I almost prefer taking photographs that were essentially black and white in color, that were black color photographs, but there were only tinges of color that kind of came out at you that were a little bit more subtle.
Well, you've got a mix of each with your range of pictures of C. Everett Koop, from a really cool black and white from his days in the Surgeon General's office up through after he'd retired and moved up here to be closer to his son and to Dartmouth. You've got that early one, again, in his office, in his Navy uniform. I think that's number 50. Yep.
Right. No, that's a nice story. This was an assignment for Dartmouth magazine, their alumni magazine. And I don't know if this was the assignment where I was taking photographs of people who had made it in Washington, D.C., who had something to do with the government and things like that, who had gone to Dartmouth. Unfortunately, I even photographed somebody like Dinesh D'Souza during this thing. But no, so I made an appointment to see him and photograph him, and his secretary said, go on in. He's with some other people, but don't worry about it. You're on time. There's no problem. So I walk in and I don't see anybody around the desk, and I turn around and there are three people on their knees in the middle of the room holding hands, and they're praying. And what it was is that many people know the story that he had a son who died in an accident fairly young. I think it was a mountaineering accident, and it really did hit him. Pardon?
Knocked him for a loop.
Oh, it did. He even wrote a book about it. And it was hard on him for forever. And he was with a family who'd lost a son much the same way, and they had gone to him to talk to him about it and get some succor, I guess, because they had read his story and read the book, and they were on the floor praying together. And I thought, well, there's a wonderful introduction to a man. So it gave me another aspect immediately of him that I hadn't realized. His politics were awful. But his heart was really in the right place. And it ended up that I ended up photographing him often during the years. And in fact, to other people, he'd point me out and say, he's my photographer. And he asked me to go down to Washington. I don't know if we have that one to show, but he asked me to come down to Washington, D.C. for his 90th birthday party.
With Fauci.
Which had Hillary Clinton and everybody else there. And I have a photograph in this that has Dr. Fauci with him when they were having a good laugh. There we go, which is more like a snapshot, but I thought it was appropriate for these days just to have him there.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, they learned from each other. I mean, just as Fauci has credited Larry Kramer with getting him to appreciate the gravity of the AIDS crisis, these two clearly had gotten some work done when it was needed.
Well, it was interesting because, I mean, as a gay man, I certainly was paying attention to these things very carefully. And I mean, Coop in many ways was a hero because he fought Reagan and he said the word AIDS, and he put together and sent out that mailing, which went to every home in the United States talking about AIDS. And that was a breakthrough. And at the same time, many of us thought of Fauci as the devil because he was not responding. He was being held under the thumb of Reagan and standing back and sometimes even fighting over who got there first. And it wasn't until Larry Kramer, the activist, who was another one of my heroes, he was a little tougher as a hero than Kennedy was, but he said, get off your duff and do something about this, and it's up to you. Be a hero. And he stepped up. And I'm glad he stepped up again. But you can still see that he isn't as free as the same way he wasn't free under Reagan with Mr. Trump. So he's kind of going through the same thing. But yes, he found a way, and he's helped us all. So I thought they were two good people to have together, even though it's more of a snapshot than anything. But they were having a good time.
And you had said that this is the 90th birthday party that was in Washington, and I think you have a shot as well of Coop in color at one of the events for him at the Hanover Inn.
Right, that was I think that was another birthday, and he was standing there, and the light was coming through the light over one of the doors, and I said, "Just stand still." And so it gave him a halo. So that was and it was interesting. When I went to his funeral in Woodstock, and I sat next to the Surgeon General at the time, and it was nice because on top of one of the things right in front on the altar was that picture of him with his halo. So that made me feel good.
Yeah, that's tough to top right there. Even if the bow tie looks a little bit like a Confederate flag, it's still.
Well, it's interesting because the Bow Ties of Vermont, which is a big bow tie place and straight ties, asked him to design a tie, and he designed that monster. And I had like 4 of them, and I just couldn't wear them. and you'd go to things where he was there with other people, and he'd be giving them ties and trying to get them to wear them, and it just looks like a Confederate flag. I never asked him what he meant by it.
Well, it's interesting that he's one of the people that you were in the right place and got to know over time. It's sort of the other end of the spectrum from sainthood to deviltry is the Clark Rockefeller.
Oh, okay.
We might as well really have a serious compare and contrast, because this is this was newsy at its time at the time. I mean, and you had this shot of him at the St. Gaudens at the annual pageant that they do every year, and he's dressed up as a
This,
god of war or something.
yeah, well, in this case, it wasn't the annual. This was a recreation of the
Oh, it's an
Mask of the
anniversary.
Golden Bowl that had been done 100 years earlier. It was like 2006 or something. And this is the guy who called himself Clark Rockefeller, but really was Mr. Gerhardt's writer. And friends from Cornish had introduced me to him one night in Hanover, and I walked around with this guy and talked with him and talked about some of the other Rockefellers that I'd worked with that and about the family, and I just got this strange feeling about this guy, and I pulled my friends aside and I said, you know, I'm glad he's over in Cornish, but I would just be careful. I'm not sure that he is who he says it is. He is. And I just watched as he was doing his manipulations, and when it came, I had offered to do this for St. Gaudens, and I went over there and suddenly realized that he was in it. And I almost didn't get this shot. I mean, I kept trying to make sure that I didn't photograph him there, but there were some scenes where, you know, he was the major thing in the scene, so I was photographing him. So there were very few photographs I took of him that day. But it ends up later on when they caught up with him and thought that he killed some people in California, but also was gotten for kidnapping his daughter and all the rest. There was need for photographs. And it ends up that the next day after they arrested him, my photograph, this one, appeared not only on the cover of the New York Daily News, but the New York Post. So again, being in the right place at the right time, I guess.
Especially getting him looking like Vladimir Putin is quite, I
Right.
don't know if it was intentional, but that's the feel you get from that one.
Well, it kind of goes with the personality, I guess.
That's hysterical. Oh,
But again, a lot of this is, a lot of life is serendipitous, and luckily, if you have a camera, you can catch it.
well, getting back to Vermont icons a little bit, you got a couple nice shots of Edward Corrin, the cartoon.
Oh, nice.
On the list here. It's hard to I would imagine somebody like that, who's ordinarily on the other side of the artistic process, being willing to be in shots like this.
Well, look at him. Isn't he photogenic? I mean, he's a wonderful person to be with and a wonderful person to photograph. And we had kind of fun with this because this was for Upper Valley Life magazine. And I went up to Brookfield where he lives, and we did some things around the studio. In fact, I photographed him a few different times, and I looked around and he had this cutout that somebody had done at the New Yorker for some party or something that had happened, and it was somewhat bent and a little discolored. But I said, how about we do something with this? And the editors especially wanted something with color to say fall. So he and I went tramping into the woods, and he was carrying this over his shoulder as we wandered around to see where we could find foliage. And finally I said, here, let's drop it here and let's pose you with it. And I really like this one because the way he's almost holding the hat, and how they're bowing to him and looking up at him. And I think this is a fun one that I like because he has plenty of humor, as you know, and just, I think that gets a little bit of it.
Oh, and just such a big contributor, I mean, culturally, civically, in this whole area. He's done so many things at the Chandler over the years, whether it's emceeing at the New World Festival, just little things like that wherever he's needed. And we seem to, in our area, have quite a few folks like that who have made it big, quote unquote, but this is where they want to be based.
Yeah, and he's been very generous with his art. I mean, when you look at tote bags or posters and things where he's given his art to nonprofits around the Upper Valley, and it's just amazing. I mean, he likes living here, and it's wonderful to see his his cartoons, which satirize the city as well as satirize the country, and usually it's from the attitude of a country person or a city person, which he can do both very easily, and just and so right on.
Oh, well,
Who else have we got?
there's so many. Since we're in Vermont, just totally away from personalities. Actually, before we do that, Tommy DePaula, who we lost recently, I wanted to
Right.
make sure to get that wonderful shot of him that you don't often see, at least over the years. I haven't seen a shot like this one, where he's just got that mirthful look in his face, and yeah.
No, I like that one. Well, I met Tommy through Trina Shart-Hyman, the illustrator, who's also left us, and also started helping him put together shows of his non-book art. In fact, we have some of it in the house, which is really nice. But he became a good friend, and I used to be shooting every other year or so photographs of him for headshots and things for books and for publicity, and got to know him quite well. And this is one of the times that, and he just was easy in front of the camera.
And again, with the book people, I tend to be a little too much towards book people, but Ernest Hebert, the novelist, the shot you have of him that you took for Dartmouth Magazine some time ago in the train yard in White River Junction. I hadn't seen that shot before, and that's
yeah, that was in the magazine. They were highlighting different people who were on the faculty who were doing different things, and this was, I don't know if it was in the midst or the beginning of the Derby series. So there was kind of
like a while back. I mean, the Dogs of March came out in 1979, so this looks like it could be early 80s.
It probably is early 80s, mid 80s. And he was living in White River Junction. And I had originally gone down there and scouted out places where I thought it would be nice. And I went to the old train yard that's down below Main Street that you usually don't go to. And this was, I don't know if this was the old ticket office or one of the others, but the screen was just torn like that. And the birds had crapped over everything, and it just, I thought, would make a great framing for him, and he was up for it. So we just wandered down there, and he did whatever I asked him to do, and I was very pleased with this one.
He being the husband of a professional photographer himself, he knew, probably had a sense of what you were looking for.
He did, I think. He's posed a lot for her. In fact, I was hoping, hey, he might use this on a book cover, but no, he had Medora. When you have a live-in photographer, who's going to ask anybody else to do it, But no, she does wonderful things. Now they're more in the south part of more south around Keene area. Pardon?
They're back around near his hometown of Keene, so
right.
That's where the roots are, literally and figuratively, in his case. And,
yep.
oh, mercy, there's so much.
Let's see. You want, I don't know how much time we have. Or
probably, what do you think? Another 10 minutes maybe?
Oh, let's give it more than that. Just, I'm trying to think who else. We haven't done anything with any of the Lizas.
Liza we have to get to before it's over. So at least,
okay.
Which one? The Liza lost to start with?
Sure.
He's not talking, schmoozing with anybody in particular in that shot.
No.
Yep.
No, this was an after party kind of thing that I was photographing for a client, and it always seemed that she needed to have a man or somebody around taking care of her. And suddenly in the midst of this room, there was just nobody there. And she started looking around, and I just thought, this is kind of Liza lost. Yeah. And it was nice with the men behind her all kind of looking toward her. And this is one that I like of this. And it's not the sharpest photograph I have. One of the things was that there wasn't a lot of opportunity to use much flash in this place, so I was having to use old film that I had to push a little bit.
So this is what, New York, like in late 70s, early 80s, maybe?
Well, this is Washington D.C. as a matter of fact,
Wow.
and it's mid 70s, probably about 76.
That makes sense because there's another picture of her talking to Halston with Henry Fonda in the background.
Yeah.
And he's the one who's looking lost in that shot.
That's true.
And
But I like the one, I don't know if we have that up, with the one of her with Sammy Davis Jr.
oh, that one, the color one. Yeah, that's
Just to get a, I don't know, did we get a different color one? I don't know.
it's another one that's on the Pride Festival website when
Right.
they have that mix of about 30 pictures. That's a cool one as well.
I made myself some notes again since I could forget. I'm trying to think what else.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, there it is.
Gotta have that.
And on the left is Jack Haley Jr., who was the son of the Tin Man. And he was married to her at the time. And I thought it was interesting, his kind of observing while they're having fun, Sammy Davis Jr. and Liza. But I really like the expressions on this one. I like how it works together and kind of flows.
Yeah, so at that point, that's probably what, 10 years after Judy died, thereabouts?
Probably something like that.
Oh. Okay, we'll swing back in a completely different direction now. You had, one of the things you talked about in your the childhood days was that photography was all part of just sort of an artistic impulse. And it was just another avenue for you. You had a lot of different ones to do. And so I thought the picture that you took at Hildene down in Manchester, at Robert Todd Lincoln's estate, that stovepipe hat of Abe's, that you had you were in the right place, right time.
That's for sure. And I didn't know that when I got there, or before I got there. This was one for Vermont Life, and I think it was part of a series on the Civil War in Vermont. And I got down to Hildene, and I said, I need to figure out what I need to photograph here. And I said, do you have anything of Lincoln's? And he said, well, we've got this stovepipe hat. And he got it out of the case, and he just handed it to me. No gloves, nothing else. He says, here, use it how you want to use it. And he went away, and I just rearranged furniture and kept moving it in different places and photographing it with different things. And just, it was like my fingers were tingling.
I can't imagine them allowing you to do now.
No, I'm sure it wouldn't happen. But it was just amazing to have this in my hands and part of the history. And this, I was I liked all the curves and everything that was kind of the time, and how the frame around the photograph goes with the chairs. And I wanted to have it there because it's of Lincoln and his family, his wife and his two boys, and the one who died, and then Robert Lincoln, who ended up in Vermont at Hildene. And so it was kind of bringing the family in with this, this was about his family and where his family was. And in fact, I think Mary, if I'm not mistaken, ended up spending a lot of time at Robert's place in Vermont. So it was a place where she was looking for some safety and a place to find some comfort with the last member of her family who was left. But I just felt so privileged and so excited about being allowed to handle this the way I could.
Really, whether it's pictures of themselves, these people you've taken pictures of, or in this instance, being allowed to use priceless artifacts to set something up. You're awfully good at getting people to trust you.
God, I don't know how. Somehow it worked. But
and in the category of trust, the picture you have on the subway Easter morning, just the way that is all framed, and those people in the picture not objecting to you taking the picture. That
No, I have to say, this is one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. This was, again, mid-'70s. On a subway, it was Easter morning in New York, and I had gone up to the cloisters and was coming down on the subway that was coming down out of Harlem, going downtown. And as you can see, everybody but we were black, essentially, and all dressed up in their finery for Easter. And I sat near the door, and I just focused where I could get the door and what was outside the door and what was in. And this opened only for so many seconds, and I shot it very quickly. I think I got 2 shots out of it before the door closed. And it was wonderful for me. I thought the people on the left who have such dignity, and it's almost like they're posing, and then everyone there is black, and then everybody on the station platform is white on the other side, and then divided by the doorway, and just the kind of almost wistful look of the white woman on the right. But I just thought everything, again, being at the right place at the right time, everything came together for me in seconds, and I couldn't quite anticipate it. I didn't know what I would get till I took it.
That brings me back to the one that we talked about. We almost forgot to include, which was the one of the kiss by the 2 men at that marriage, and that one that made the Times wedding page, and that ended up being the first of its kind to be on the wedding page back when that was, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, relatively speaking, but it was a breakthrough then.
And then afterwards, I do want to get to the photograph that kind of was is one that has been sent out kind of as the basis for this. But yes, this was for a while. I have to say, till Verizon screwed up my phone system for 6 months, I was doing a lot of stringing for the New York Times. And one of the things they asked me to do a few times was photograph for their vows section. So they sent me to different wedding venues to photograph the weddings and the getting ready and everything afterwards. And this was one of, and I've got the names written down so I can tell you who these were. This is Dr. William Cerati and William Stelling.
Yes.
And they originally wanted to get, and this was civil union still, and they wanted to get a civil union in New York, and then it ended up that had been allowed, and then they couldn't do it. And then Vermont opened it up. So they decided to have this in Vermont. So I was photographing them with their nephews and nieces and everything, getting ready and all this sort of stuff. And one of the problems, I was shooting a lot, and the battery was getting very low on my camera. And I'm shooting away, and I'm thinking, I want something more, and I'm waiting for them. I'm shooting as they're dancing, and finally they start to kiss. And I thought, I've got to get it right now. So I got it just before their lips met, and I didn't have enough power to get it right when they got the kiss. So it's a little shaky, and it's almost there, but it ends up that this has become an icon on the web, in that I've read that many people consider this the first gay kiss in the vows in the New York Times. So I still get credit even if I didn't get the lips touching, but it was a wonderful thing to watch and be part of, and see it recognized by the New York Times too, because it was one of the, I don't know if it was the first, but it was very early as far as they're covering this kind of thing and including it in the vows. And later, Daryl and I were in the vows. Daryl Hotchkiss and I, when we got married, finally, without Reverend Sloan Coffin, but with Jean Burling, who married us. So we got ours.
All right. Well, how do we improve on that? I mean,
Well, I thought if we could go to Paul Cadmus and John Anderson, because that's one.
That's number one. Yep. And that's a relationship of considerable standing and complexity.
Yes, and important in the art world. I've labeled this as Paul and John, but John is the one on the left and Paul is on the right. Paul Cadmus was an artist who died just before he was 95. And he was very controversial because he was very out, and his paintings included gay themes in them. He was commissioned in the 30s to create a mural for the Navy, and it was called The Fleet's Inn. And he has these rather ugly looking sailors making out with these ugly floozies. And then there's kind of a gay assignation going on in the background. And this was done for the Navy. And some of them liked it, but the people in charge were up in arms, and they covered it up for a while, and then it finally ended up in the closet of some admiral's house for a long time. But he worked especially in egg tempera, which is almost a Renaissance kind of medium, and he did just beautifully detailed things, and he was known for his amazing artistry, and he became kind of a gay icon for many people who understood his art and appreciated. And it's somewhat like thinking about Frank Kameny. He had become somewhat of one of my heroes, my interest in art. And I'd seen a lot of his things in Washington, D.C. later on, but I had known about his stuff fairly early on. And I started writing him. And so we became pen pals. And then I started sending him photographs, one of which is in the show. And he seemed to like my photographs. And then his brother-in-law, Lincoln Kirstein, who had started the American Ballet Theater and one of the great men in arts and theater and dance in the 20th century, also wrote me letters saying, "Oh, I like these things." And he said, "Come on up." And he'd send me invitations to their openings and things. And so said, "Come on down to Connecticut and let's photograph." So I spent good part of the day photographing the two of them while he was sketching John. John had been a young man who had started modeling for him, and they became lovers, and that lasted for probably 50 some years. And in fact, I got a call from John a few years ago thanking me for doing these things, because a lot of people haven't depicted the two of them together. And in fact, I was very sad to find out, because I was going to invite John to be part of this opening, and found out that he died 2 years ago, unfortunately. But Paul lived to be 94, and one of the last things, he invited me down to the D.C. Gomorrah Gallery in New York to photograph. They were having a 95th birthday party for him, even though it was almost a year away. I guess they were a little worried, but so I don't know if Seth has that photograph. But this is probably,
Oh yeah, beautiful.
if not the last, one of the very last photographs taken of them together, because only months later, Paul died before he reached 95. So this was it's almost like my picture of Coop and Fauci. I like them having a good time here.
Yeah.
But he was very, very kind to me and appreciative, and I just worshipped him at his feet. He's just an amazing man, and a gentleman who again lived his life the way he wanted to live his life, and was out there for anybody to
People
see.
thought or said. At
Pardon?
a time when it was borderline fatal for a lot of people to take that approach.
Absolutely.
Well,
I think we have one more on the list, which is William Ivy Long, if you don't mind doing that one. I don't know if
I know you wanted to fit this one in if we could. So number
I don't know if it's the best one to end with, but
53, but this is somebody who's just so, he's not a marquee name except in the theater world. But again, the level of accomplishment, I mean, 9 Tonys.
Well, I think it's 6 Tonys. I think I miswrote that. I think he's been nominated 9 times, but he's gotten 6 Tonys, and he had the record for the most shows on Broadway at the same time that he designed, which was 9 shows at once on Broadway that he had designed. I mean, most people would know the shows that he's done. You know, he's done Hairspray and Guys and Dolls, and I'm trying to think of many of the others that you might know even better. But people don't necessarily know the name of somebody who does the costumes. But this was, again, early on when we all were young, and we had gone to school together, and William and Mary, and I kept up with him when he was at Yale. He was at Yale at the same time that Wendy Wasserstein was, and Meryl Streep, and everybody. It was an amazing time to be at Yale in the drama department at that time. And he worked with Min Cho Lee, who thought he was quite wonderful in his design. But he got out of there, and there wasn't a lot of work to do. He, like I, started reinventing himself. He worked for, I'm trying to think his first name, Charles James, who was a clothing designer and interior designer for a while. And then about just before this, he started this thing of creating costumes for dolls. So he did exquisite dolls that Jackie Onassis started buying, and her sister Radziwill started buying, and they started getting all their friends to buy his dolls. And that was kind of what he did in the meantime while waiting to do costume designs for the stage. And this was during a time when he was one of his very first commissions, which was called The Killing of Jock Yablonsky, which was about a story about a guy who had to do with the mines in the Virginia, and about the all the bad people who were in charge of things. In fact, I'm trying to think of the movie. Pardon?
John Sayles' movie Matewan, I think, right?
Well, not so much, but Harlan County, USA, the movie, that in fact a friend of ours from DC did the music for it. In fact, and in fact, she did one about Yablonsky. But he was doing this theater thing, and when I went to, he was living at the Chelsea at the time, and I photographed him in and out of there. But he went on to do amazing stuff, and it just works like mad. I mean, again, to have 9 shows going at once. I mean, he hardly sleeps, but amazing guy, and has been a good friend forever.
All right. Well, I'm looking at the screen here, and I think we've got 68 people participating in one form or another. I'm wondering if we should see who we've got and who wants to check in.
Sounds good. You know, I looked earlier on, and at least my 95-year-old aunt is out there somewhere, if she's still there. So looks like a good group, I think. But may we open it up to questions? Anybody out there, if you're still there? I don't know if I should call people out.
Let's see, John.
I don't
So
see any.
people can either raise their hands and I can activate their microphone so they can ask a question, or they can submit questions through the question and answer portal that's located at the bottom of the screen.
Oh, Q&A. Here we go. Not seeing any there yet under Q&A. So maybe hand raising might be the best way.
Maybe I've put them to sleep. I hear a woman's laugh. Who are you?
Oh, it's Alexis.
Alexis.
Hold on, I'm trying to reach you every which way.
Oh, it's better. Okay.
Hi. So, John, I just wanted to say I've known you for so many years, and yet I didn't know any of this. And it's marvelous history told so beautifully. And God, you talk almost as well as you take pictures. I just want to thank you because I feel like it was a discovery of a world unknown to me. And the scope of it, starting from was it Frank Kemeny, and
Yeah.
all the way through to people up here. And I've seen a lot of your photographs over the years. So I just think it was a beautiful arc that you showed us of your own life and the world of gay and lesbian people, more gay than lesbian, I will say. But
Sorry about that. Daryl
that's
asked me
okay.
tonight.
The beauty that you brought your own beauty to those photographs, and it really shows the way people look at you. It's just very revealing that you are the photographer. I know that from how they're looking at you. And I just want to thank you for what an amazing body of work, and your spirit as well. So what a treat. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. That's makes me feel good.
Good.
And for the rest of you, Alexis Jenner is an amazing writer who also I photographed years ago. So she got me into Vogue by doing an author's photograph. So
You've always been in Vogue.
oh,
Thanks.
thank you.
There we go.
Chaz, New York. Chaz is quiet.
Oh, he has to be unmuted here.
John, can you hear me now?
There we go.
I can hear you now.
Okay, well, I started typing, but if I have a chance to actually talk to you, that's even better.
Well, all right.
That's fantastic. It's great to see you, my friend.
Well, same here.
I know that it was a few years ago that we were hoping to see each other in New York, and different things conspired to prevent that from happening. But I sure hope you come back to town sometime soon so we can all get together again.
I hope I do too, but this is nice. Thanks.
I love seeing your work. It's always, it's always so immediate and so personal at the same time. You have this ability to like get to know somebody, but then just grab them in a split second. There's no posing. There's no, artifice going on or anything like that. You seem to look into people's eyes or look into their souls and capture them at that split second. And that's a theme that remains consistent through everything that you just showed us today. And I'm so proud of you for doing what you do.
Well, thank you.
It's really
Now I have to say I photographed Chaz in the 1980s in the UN with his big feet, with his beautiful boots up on the counter at one of, I think it was the USSR.
You're absolutely right. They were brand new Blucher boots from Fairfax, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And you set me up in the Russian delegation, USSR delegation desk with my feet up on the desk to take that picture. It was great.
I did. You looked right at home.
Well, that was thanks to you.
All right.
Good time to do it, man.
Thanks.
Really good to do it. So listen, as you comb through all of I was about to type you this question, but as you comb through your body of work, all these years of spectacular portraits and moments, are you looking for a publisher to like create your volumes now? Can you start to like publish these things, put them in book form so that we can put them on our coffee tables and share them with friends?
Well, I'm not sure I'm looking for one, and I don't know who has a coffee table anymore.
I got one.
All right, you can make coffee tables out of the books that I did that haven't sold, but no, that would be nice. But I don't know. They're probably, I think there are people who have to do with books listening in here. But I don't know how much anybody wants to publish those things or who wants to see it. So this is my book.
Well,
I don't know that can do anything else.
It's lovely. I mean, the breadth and depth of your experiences, and to be able to share them this way. I mean, I was just thinking about how, you know, in an odd way, this terrible viral era of ours has just created a new medium, and these Zoom openings, I think, should become a norm for all art, for the art world. And I'm glad you're a pioneer in this right now, and may they continue. May we be able to tune into you on a regular basis and see
Well, I'm glad it worked.
how you do it. So good for you. Good
Well,
for you.
thank you.
I don't want to monopolize your airtime. I send you my love, dear friend.
Well,
many congratulations. This is
same back at you, but I think you must know from what you've seen and what you've heard that I've had fun. So thanks for making tonight fun too.
It is. It's been great, man. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you.
Thanks.
More soon. We'll stay in touch.
Okay.
Thanks, buddy.
There's a big R on the screen. Richard. This is somebody who's a classmate at Dartmouth of my husband, Daryl. Richard.
Yes,
You're there.
I am.
And Ruth.
And Ruth.
And
Ruth wrote
Ruth,
the question.
his wife.
Yes, and you've taken some beautiful pictures of us at
Well, I had
Musa
good subjects.
and the front of your house. We love those pictures. We're
Oh,
very
nice.
proud to have them.
It was pretty crazy to get to see all this history in once. We couldn't have gotten that much talk out of you in one evening, but we certainly have
And you're
cashed
probably
in
glad
big.
of it.
We cashed in big on this one. This is a great job here.
Well, thanks for being here. That's important.
Would not have missed it.
All right. Well, I hope we'll see you soon.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Oh no, this is a cousin, Valley, who's an amazing artist.
Hi, Joe. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
Can't hear me.
I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, John, I really appreciate hearing all about what you have been doing and hearing from a different perspective. I have some of your artwork, and I have wonderful pictures that you took of our children when they were young, who are now in their 50s, believe it or not.
Gosh.
When we all lived in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Anyway, this was a wonderful retrospective of your work, and I feel like I've had a long journey with you. Anyway,
You've been looking at your watch all evening.
no, I love your artistry, and just I'm grateful that I was able to join the opening.
Well, I am too.
Yeah.
I've been admiring your work on Facebook and online. So everybody out there, look for Valley McDougall's beautiful, beautiful work. Just
Thank
amazing colors. It looks like the photograph of you, you're standing in front of one of them.
I am, right.
I can do commercials too here.
Right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And this is my aunt who's 95.
And she needs to unmute.
Sally. Lower left. Sounds like
There she is.
There she is. You're okay, Sally. Speak up. I don't know if it's going to work. She's unmuted. Sally? Huh. She may not know she's there. Sounds like she's turning some pages. Seth, what should we do? Seth's muted too.
I would say we should go on to Mr. Corrin.
I think we better do that. Sorry. Hello.
Hello, hello. Is it?
Hello, hello.
Oh my gosh. I didn't know that I was unmuted. So quickly.
I don't think you've ever been muted.
No, but I just, as one of your wonderful subjects who may still be alive, I just wanted to give a sense of what it was like to work with you, because how wonderful it was, and how to give a little glimpse into your eye and your artist sensibility and your human sensibility that informs that as well. And the photograph that was shown, that you chose, you encouraged me over my slight hesitation to pose with one of my works to begin with, much less that one, and then to encourage me to take it up into the woods quite a ways, maybe a quarter of a mile or a third of a mile up the hill along a path and field. That was your vision, Jon, and I was just wanted to point that out to everyone who's watching, is how the nature and depth of your professional skills, eye, and techniques, and what you see in your subject. And it's just how it's an appreciation of that from on a technical human level. So that's my salute to you. And,
well, thank you.
And also one amendation: I never was an MC at the New World Festival. I'm too shy to do that.
All right.
But I did do some T-shirts for them, so that's
you did
my comfort zone. Anyway, bravo!
Well,
wonderful to see what your work is, and I echo what one of your other guests who weighed in. I never knew all the things that I learned tonight about you, and I'm terribly impressed with your opus and how you've amassed it. Well done, bravo.
Well, thank you for being here, and thanks for that. That's means a lot. Are we going to try Sally again? Ah, a niece and her duck. My niece is a most wonderful, wonderful teacher. And she also takes in all these stray animals and gives them lives, and they love her.
Not here.
Pardon?
She's not here.
She's not here. Oh, we're talking with my sister.
Yeah.
And those who've watched things on Facebook of me, you've seen a lot of my sister as we were growing up and dealing with each other.
You didn't show the one with the bandages on your head.
No. This isn't. These aren't pictures of me, thank goodness. It's bad enough having this face going live tonight.
I know, you look a little strange.
Thank you.
Kiana
Like I said, this is my sister.
do I have a question?
I hope so.
Who was the favorite person that you've ever taken a picture of?
Gosh, favorite person.
Other than the family.
God.
A celebrity.
What?
A celebrity or a person known.
Oh, known person, not my mother.
No, I said not family.
Okay. God, that's hard to say. Wow.
Yes.
I don't know that I can think of a favorite. I mean, each of them, the experience was different, and in most cases it was as good. I mean, I have warm feelings about lots of encounters with people and what I came away from them. I can't think of one that was my favorite. I mean, it's like I photographed Tommy DePaula a lot over the years. I photographed Everett Koop a lot over the years, but I don't know that they were my favorites.
Didn't you do Trina?
No, I did Trina a couple times, but no. I can't tell you a favorite. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I may have to call you sometime if I ever figure I have one.
What room are you in?
Pardon?
What room are you in?
I'm in the den.
Oh, okay.
It's in the Fox den tonight. I hear Daryl wandering around in the background.
I wondered where Daryl was.
Well, he was at his computer watching this and taking the dog out of the house so that she wasn't making noise and barking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm done asking questions. I just wanted you to know that I did watch, and I watched the whole thing.
Well, all right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, John, we got about 3 more people on the line here.
All right.
And Seth is hoping to maybe wrap up in 5 minutes. Is that workable?
Sure. 3 more people sounds good.
Okay, Frank Lesher looks like is next.
Hey, Frank.
He just has to unmute.
There he goes.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm all right. Thank you. This has been a nice evening with friends.
We've enjoyed it so much. Barbara and I are here in Chicago.
Ah.
Yeah, we've enjoyed every minute of this.
An adult conversation.
Hi,
Did
guys.
she say adult conversation?
We've been filling in temporarily on childcare for 2 grandchildren
Oh, nice.
for like 6 weeks. Yeah, just shoot me now. But anyway.
So this is your adult evening.
This was a wonderful escape to something a lot of fun, John.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
And I just wanted to say, the one thing that sums up your life is serendipity. The word you used earlier. The way you've run into these people and made them your subjects is just amazing to me.
Oh, well, thanks. I'm like I said, I've been lucky.
Wow.
And
Anyway,
and I have to say, I mean, one of the things that, in fact, talked to David about this. He's somewhere in the background, but I'm lucky to have Daryl because Daryl took me out of DC in the middle of another crisis, and it was in the middle of the AIDS crisis. And I'm not sure that if he hadn't gotten me monogamous and out of a big city, that I would be talking to you right now. So a lot of what's happened since I owe to Daryl.
Yeah, that's the good kind of serendipity.
All right.
Hey, signing off from Chicago, and we hope to see you back in New Hampshire in a couple months.
Yes, sir. Travel safely.
Thanks.
And here's a sister-in-law from Rochester, Vermont, New York. Excuse me.
Hi, John. Scott and I are here.
Hi, Scott and Chris.
We're here at Sodas Bay, and we want to thank you for inviting us to this wonderful opening. You're quite a lecturer, so it's no surprise that you were a teacher of photography.
Huh.
It was wonderful.
Well, thank you. So glad you were here.
And John, thanks for everything you've done for our family in all the years that we've known you. Your life is especially extraordinary. Your relationships with folks abound. Well done, John. Well done.
Oh, thank you.
But I have to add one question.
Uh-oh.
When we try to photograph you, you're not quite as comfortable as
we already got you.
No.
We just have to laugh because obviously you have the artist's effect and maybe, you know, it's a little bit easier for you to be on that side of the lens, but we do enjoy our, you know, typical snapshot of you when we can get it.
Thanks for all you've done for our family.
Yeah, thank you,
thank
John.
you.
And to Daryl.
Yeah.
Thank you for making me part of your family.
Yeah, you're welcome. Congratulations. It's wonderful.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Now here's an old classmate from high school.
Oh my goodness.
We used to wrestle intramurally.
Yes, we did.
And I usually pinned you.
Every time.
And he's also quite an amazing artist.
A question for you.
Yes.
Was John Jennings Jennings the start of your learning photography, or did you start before that?
Well, no, that's a good thing. We, Steve and I, and maybe even some other people that are on listening tonight, we went to school in an amazing place at an amazing time. It was a school in the middle of nowhere. It was a central school that so many towns fed it, students, and I'd have to walk. It's the old walking so many miles to get to the school bus and then spending an hour or more on the school bus. But it was during the time when the New York State Arts Association was very good, and Rockefeller was the governor, and they had lots of money and they spent it like mad. And we were also Woodstock, where Steve lived, which had been an artist colony since the 1890s. Was a part of this, and so they wanted to make sure the arts were important. And in our high school, we, not in the art department, we not only had somebody teaching drawing, a separate person teaching painting, another person teaching sculpture and photography, and so you had individual instructors for these things, and one was photography, which many of us took, and that's where I really learned how to work in a dark room, and gave me a lot of discipline. And it again in that high school gave me a lot of outlets for it. I did the photography for the yearbook and for the newspaper, and I did things in the area. And there again, that was my dark room, was in school, and I could still do things out in the community and use that dark room. So yes, Mr. Jennings was the beginning of my being able to branch out and use my photography in ways that I couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah, it was an inspiring experience. That's where I got my interest in art when I got started too.
Right, and now that's your career.
Well, it certainly doesn't pay the bill.
Well, okay.
Out of bars.
Well, glad you're here, and glad to keep seeing your stuff.
Okay, thanks.
Looks like we might squeeze in Karen Temple before we.
Well, there's another classmate who I just saw in her down in Mexico. I think she's still in Mexico, sitting out the virus.
Still in Mexico.
Whoa.
You and Daryl are the last people I've seen in the entire world.
Oh no.
The last time I went
Die
out
now then.
the last time I was walking in the streets was with you.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I loved it.
Me too. Me too.
Nice.
Thanks for the show.
Well, thanks for being in the audience, and thanks for being here with me. That's important to me. It makes a difference.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Well, this was so cool. I'm glad you finished off on the subject of art in the schools, because the way, even before everything went crazy here, the way arts in the schools have been cut
David?
6 days to Sunday.
We want to see you, David.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Well, my job right now is to send us off to Karen Dillon to close out. But thank you for inviting me to do this. This was just so much fun.
Well, thank you. And I couldn't have found anybody better to do this. I mean, once they said they were going to do this, I said, I've got to ask David. But also, I should probably, I've been putting in things about books, but I also should make sure that people understand that there is a silent auction connected with this.
Oh, good.
So, and all the proceeds go to help Pride. And there's a lot of books, and there's also a big dinner included in that. And as well, she said, I don't know if anybody wants a print of any of these things, but if you give a donation of $150 or more, I'll get a print done and sign it for you for any kind of donation above $150, that all the proceeds except what it costs to make the print will go to Pride. And this is a time when they all need help, and when you can't sit in the theater and pay for the tickets, and you can't go to the show and buy the prints, it's the best we can do. So any help you can do is very appreciated. Thanks for being with me.
My pleasure. All right, we send it off to Karen Dillon now.
Thank you for joining us for the kickoff of the 10th anniversary of Vermont Pride Theater at Chandler. We hope you enjoyed the discussion tonight with Jon Gilbert Fox, interviewed by David Corriveau. Online at www.chandler-arts.org, you can see the whole body of Jon's work. You can also participate in our silent auction of memorabilia items to raise money for Vermont Pride. And don't forget, we have 3 virtual plays with 6 total performances. Tickets are available at www.chandler-arts.org. Thank you so much for participating. Good night.